And now for an example of real bipartisanship in Washington. We're talking Filipino veterans of World War II. Both the Senate and the House have approved a Congressional Gold Medal, and not just for the vets from the Philippines. That's next on Emil Guillermo's Takeout. And hello, my dear listener. Whoever you may be, or wherever you may be, welcome to what I call Emil Guillermo's Takeout. We serve it, you take it out. Forms the acronym EAT, E-A-T, and it is time to eat. It's my takes on all things about race, society, politics, and diversity, and everything those things touch in our culture and society with respect to Asian Americans. And of course, you don't have to be Asian American to lend us your ears. It's your minds we want. And besides, we're all in the same boat anyway. Remember that. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host. And you might say, why Amok, Emil? Well, the short story is that for nearly 15 years, my Emil Amok column was a staple of Asian Week, what was once the leading Asian American weekly in English in America. Amok was the name of my compilation of essays, and Amok is on my driver's license, not indicative of my mental state. And it's the name of my solo show, coming for just in time for Filipino American History Month in October. In fact, it's coming on October 18th to Stockton, to the University of Pacific. One night only. Stay tuned for details. And in November, we're going to be at the Charm City Fringe Festival in Baltimore. Once again, stay tuned for details. We'll show you how to get tickets. And now, of course, my column is home based on the website of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund blog. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Check it out. And if you like what you see and hear, ALDEF is a 501c3. Go to the donate button there. It's tax deductible. And you can also read me in other publications too, Inquirer.net. diverseeducation.com. You can read me on the archives at sfgate.com. Oh, that's Dr. David Dow shrieking there in the background. I told him he should have flown Southwest. He flew United. Now I guess he owns part of United or something. I don't know. Hey, on this episode, bipartisanship. We're talking Trump and DACA this week. There he was stumbling at it. First he had that dinner. Well, he's been trying to deal with Democrats, and he's been dealing with, on the debt ceiling, right? The debt ceiling, he dealt with the Democrats and to the chagrin of the Republicans. And now on DACA, he had dinner. He had Chinese food with Charles Schumer of the Senate. And also, we can't forget Nancy Pelosi on the House Minority Leader. And so after having Chinese food, of course, the Democrats were hungry for power, and as the old joke goes, and they released a statement saying, we got a deal. The exact wording was something that, we've agreed, right? We agreed to enshrine the protections of DACA into law quickly and to work out a package of border security excluding the wall that's acceptable to both sides. That's what the Democratic statement was, and they rushed it. I don't think they took an hour to try to assume some power on this, but they got Trump into a corner, and Trump, after that dinner, apparently had a case of acid reflux. He said, hey, no deal was made on DACA, and there's going to be a wall. He had to say that. But then he tweeted out conflicting messages that said, does anyone really want to throw out the good, educated, and accomplished young people who have jobs, some serving in the military? Really? So it left people wondering what the heck is going on here. And even Breitbart started calling Trump Amnesty Don. So... And then later on, Trump came back and said, no, we're talking. There's a pathway to something. So bipartisanship is not going to be easy, but we appear to be heading down that path, which means we probably are going to find ourselves playing some, bamboo politics, which is a kind of situational politics where who knows where we bend or, we bend to the left or bend to the right as long as we don't break, I guess, huh? And Trump really doesn't care as long as he wins, right? And as long as he comes up with something, and I said this previously, as long as he comes up with this notion that, hey, this is not Obama's DACA, this is really Trump's action on childhood arrivals, Trump's deal, and as long as it looks like Trump's winning, I don't think he cares if it's Democrat or Republican leaning. He just wants to get the credit. So we'll see how Trump's version of bipartisanship works out. In the meantime, there is a real bipartisanship that works in Congress. And an example is the Congressional Gold Medal for Filipino Vets of World War II, which was just announced in the aftermath of the whole brouhaha over DACA and that Democratic dinner that Trump had. It was announced by House Speaker Paul Ryan that the House and the Senate have agreed to this resolution that was initiated by Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, and October 25th will be the formal presentation of this medal to the community. Now, the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project has been working on getting replica medals, and they'll be presenting on that same day 1,000 medals to those people who've already registered on their website. So listen now to my conversation with Ben DeGuzman about how this whole thing worked out, this bipartisan victory, really, because it required a majority of senators, actually more, a supermajority, like 70 senators, and about 290 members of the House to come together and sign on to this resolution in order for it to pass unanimously. And so here's Ben DeGuzman of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project talking about the Congressional Gold Medal for Filipino Veterans of World War II. Congratulations are in order, right? I mean, this is a big deal, but was this harder or easier than you thought it would be?
In some ways, I think it was both. We knew coming in that it was a higher bar than previous kind of work that we've done. As a Congressional Gold Medal bill, it needed to have 2/3 of the House and Senate to pass because we had to kind of go on unanimous consent. And so, ultimately around 70 senators co-sponsored and over, over 200, 290 co-sponsors in the House. So just making sure that enough members of Congress got their eyeballs on the bill, was a challenge. I mean, once you see the bill and once you hear their story, it's pretty hard to deny. So we've always said this bill has had a high sympathy quotient, but a low visibility quotient, right? So not everybody knows the story. And so, we had to do a lot of kind of pounding the pavement on Capitol Hill.
All right. But this is really an example of what is almost the ideal bipartisan bill, right? I mean, this is one where there's no contention really, but it's still hard. It's not easy to get this.
Yeah, I think that's right. Again, I think because we don't know our history, the role that the Philippines played in the Pacific Theater has never been, appropriately talked about. I mean, maybe people know about the Bataan Death March, but they certainly don't know about, the Filipinos who really held the line. People might know General MacArthur saying, "I shall return," but nobody thinks about what happened after he left. Mm-hmm. right? And the soldiers that had to kind of clean up after and hold the line, in order for the Allies to get, in order for MacArthur to get his, the forces in line again to ultimately win out there. So, we've had to fight the amnesia in a lot of ways of American history, and then the role that we've forgotten that Filipino soldiers played in restoring our democracy.
But once you get that story across, it should be fairly a slam dunk, right? I mean, that's what I would figure. Except, and I bring it up now because we're talking in Washington about bipartisan politics and the difficulty of bipartisan politics. And so on the one hand, you have this, which is still a fight because you have to fight this amnesia that you call it. And then on the other hand, you have DACA, which we seem to have a kind of bipartisanship building, but we have some contentious items that we have to get through in order to make it to get it passed, right?
No, I think that's right. I think part of what gives me hope in this political environment is, whenever we would meet with people whom I didn't think would be on our side, time and again, we would meet with Democrats, we would meet with Republicans. And even when I thought coming in that it would be, hard for them to do, we went into a Republican senator's office and, they sent out, this very well-meaning intern to meet with us, but, he was very clearly kind of the low person on their, food chain that they're like, oh, well, we don't know who these people are. We'll just send the youngest person out to meet them. But it turned out that his grandfather served in the Pacific Theater. And so, he knew that this was an issue and, he brought it up the chain of command and, the senator signed on. And so, I think when people hear the right thing to do, the optimist in me thinks that people still know what the right thing to do is, and they just need to be reminded of it.
All right, so you had Paul Ryan announcing it. The significance of the speaker doing this, he's a Republican. Does it give him some standing in the community? Did he want to do it? Was this purposeful as opposed to having someone like Pelosi from San Francisco or someone like someone from another big Filipino area, Virginia, New York?
No, I would say two things. One is, this is part of the speaker's role, right? It's a piece of legislation. It's as a Congressional Gold Medal piece of legislation. It is, it's part of the process that the speaker, manage that process, right? And so the Congressional Gold Medal needs to be presented to the honoree. And so, as a Congressional Gold Medal, it is a function of the speaker's office. So, so that said, it had to be the speaker. Yeah. It had to be Speaker Ryan. So in that sense, it doesn't matter. It was simply a function of who was in that office at the time.
But still, it gives him some brownie points and gives him some standing in the community, and that's not bad for him, I guess, and bad for Filipinos who tend to be Republican.
Well, I think that's probably right, but I would also say that, again, we had to make sure that we did navigate the process and make sure that, that we were bringing on Republicans and Democrats. And, you can look at the bill, right, and see out of the 70 members of Congress, 70 senators who signed, it was, the ledger doesn't lie, right, I guess, right? And you can see how many Democrats co-sponsored it and how many Republicans.
All right, so tell me.
And it was about even numbers on the same side, on both the House and the Senate.
All right, 70 senators co-sponsored it, right? All right, 70. There's 100 senators. So how did it break down? Who name some senators who would not meet with you or who would not say, hey, I'm for this. Name the ones who are the most egregious, you would say.
Well, I would say that there was no instance where, at least that I recall, that someone flat out refused to meet us. People would be busy. it's a challenge anyway. But no one ever said I am not co-sponsoring this.
But name some of the 30 who did not sign on. The 30 senators.
So what I will say is that I don't have the list in front of me. I mean, people can look on thomas.loc.gov. But once, the Senators Hirono and Heller, a Democrat and a Republican, drove this through the Senate. And both of them, met with us personally, not just through their staff, and told us that they were committed to doing this. And so, I mean, I think the ultimate numbers were probably about maybe 2-1 Democrats to Republicans. I mean, the Democratic Party has just had a longer history of support on this issue,
Right.
The champions for this have always been Democrats. Republicans have always been responsible for, passing legislation that we've gotten for the veterans. But, speaking on a bipartisan level, but, it's been a longer history, the demographics,
Right.
matter in terms of where Filipinos are and where veterans have been.
All right, let me ask it this way: was there one senator or a member of Congress, a member of the House, who did not back it that surprises you?
I wish I had a fancy Washington D.C. story for you, Emil. But I think, I think because this story is so sympathetic, once we were able to get it sufficiently up the chain of command in any given member's office, they ultimately came through for us. And so what would happen is once the whip counters, in the House and Senate got to the number that they wanted, they knew that it would pass. And so they put it up, and then it moved through unanimous consent or whatever.
All right, but still, you said 2-1 Democrats to Republican supported this. That means there was some, and it's a majority Republican, legislature. There were some Republicans who weren't with you.
No, I think that's right. Speaking, from a bipartisan level, we did get support on both sides. But again, the history of support and opposition to this bill, has been unfortunately partisan. It was Republicans, Senator Craig, the infamous Senator Craig from Idaho, was the ranking member of the bill when we tried to, pass the equity bill back in 2007 and 2008. And so his initial opposition, was really critical in, being a roadblock to us until he sort of fell from grace. And then, in some ways, that helped, smooth the path for us to pass a bill in the Senate, which we were able to do back in 2008. But, history will remember who supported us and who didn't, I would say.
All right, so we're going to get to that equity bill, which ultimately passed in 2009. But let's get to the nuts and bolts of this one. You're going to honor with the Congressional Medal the Filipino veterans on October 25th. And this is going to be a formal recognition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this Congressional Gold Medal, for our listeners, the significance of a Congressional Gold Medal and why it's different from any other medal that you can receive. Why was this important? Who got it in the past? And why were the Filipinos overlooked?
So, the Congressional Gold Medal is one of the highest medals that the U.S. government can bestow. You've got the Congressional Gold Medal, you've got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and, very few honors that the government can bestow reach this level. Right. And so, so obviously this is very important. In the past couple of years, you've seen some of the World War II military units that came from, constituencies that had their own sort of unique experiences of discrimination and transcended that, discrimination to serve with distinction in World War II. So, the Tuskegee Airmen, the women air service pilots, the Navajo code talkers, the Borinqueniers, like Puerto Rican military units. And then the Japanese, the Nisei veterans of World War II who came out of internment camps to serve.
The 442nd, right? The 442nd?
The 442nd, the MIS, and the,
that's all right. I'll forgive you for not for remembering that.
But yeah, so those folks, there were very clear instances of discrimination that all of these military units, faced, and despite that went on to serve with distinction in World War II. When it came time for Filipinos to talk about this, we're the only, military unit group that actually had their service rendered moot. Like the U.S. government proactively denied their service after the war, when the Rescission Acts of 1946. So, all of these other military units that got a Congressional Gold Medal, they went on to receive their pension benefits. They went on to receive the GI Bill. And, for our veterans, they were left in the cold. So, so for us, it's particularly meaningful. And the history of discrimination and hardship that they faced, not just during the war, not just during the Bataan Death March, but for 70 years afterwards, that makes this Congressional Gold Medal kind of even more sweet.
So, in other words, because of the equity pay fight, which you'd been, been part of that fight for we mentioned how in 2009 it was finally passed after some objections by Senator Craig all those years. The equity fight did get in the way of them getting any kind of recognition. I mean, it was really first things first, right? And that was priority, I imagine.
Right. Well, just as a kind of history lesson for us, as I'm talking about history of 10 years ago, the equity bill that we had fought for as a community was passed by the Senate. Unfortunately, the House wasn't able to follow suit. And so what was ultimately passed, through the help of Senator Inouye and all of our champions in the House and Senate, what was ultimately passed was not quite full equity, but the one-time compensation fund, the one-time payment, and the creation of the Filipino Veterans Equity Compensation Fund, right, in 2009. Right. So, so that was sort of a bittersweet victory. On one hand, we got them a significant kind of policy victory, but at the same time, it still wasn't what we had fought for. And so when we were looking at what was left or what we could do for them realistically, the Congressional Gold Medal, was the idea that was most likely to pass, and I think was something that we felt was important, for the symbolicness of it.
Right.
Like people, the community is trying to take care of the veterans as much as we can. They're all old, and they're great organizations that are providing critical services for them. Uh-huh. And this Congressional Gold Medal is the least we can do as the symbol of a grateful nation for them.
And I will link to some of the articles I've done on equity pay and how in 2009, because of President Obama and the Senate, it was signed, and it wasn't the greatest in terms of the full equity that everyone was fighting for, but it got a lump sum benefit to most of the veterans. Still, I've written some articles just within the last couple of years saying how some veterans are still protesting or still in appeal. It's still hard to prove their cases because some of the paperwork and some of the documentation is gone, but for some, they still continue to fight. So it's still kind of bittersweet there, but this is a good thing because they're getting this Congressional Medal. So how many veterans here will be honored? And I guess as a point of history again, these are the veterans who fought, who were members of the USA FFE, the U.S. Armed Forces in Asia.
In the Far East.
In the Far East, excuse me, yes. These were those guys. These weren't necessarily the Filipino Americans who were here, who were able to join the Army and fight in World War II? Or are they counted here?
Well, so, we spent a lot of time, going over the legislation and being very specific about the history. We have an academic advisory committee of, folks, scholars from MIT, scholars from the University of Maryland, College Park, and, people who pored over the history to make sure that the legislation was expansive enough to cover everybody. And was able to square the circle in a way that was still meaningful for folks. But what I will say is that the first and second regiments of Filipino Americans, they are eligible as well.
Oh, okay.
So, members of, people who fought under USAFE, the first and second Filipino regiments, Filipino American regiments rather, as well as, Americans who served in USAFE alongside Filipinos. So that's something that's often not talked about. But, all of the American soldiers who survived the Bataan Death March, their families are eligible as well. And so, we're encouraging people to sign up on our registry because, the efforts that we're undertaking to provide a replica of the medal for each of the eligible veterans, we're providing veterans, anyone who meets the qualifications that's laid out in the legislation.
So in other words, in the equity pay situation, that was really for the Philippine Scouts and the USAFFE, not necessarily for the Filipino Americans who were here in the United States and then ended up fighting in World War II. This is for, the equity pay was for the rescission really affected a number of, Filipino fighters who were part of that USAFFE and the Filipino Scouts. And that was how many soldiers or how many military personnel would you say were included in that equity bill? Just a rough number.
Well, so ultimately, 18,000 veterans received benefits under the Equity Compensation Fund. Over twice that amount applied. And so, there's still, as you said, there's still some question and there's still cases that are on appeal. We've been trying to work through, legislative means, administrative means, working with the VA to try to figure out how we can make sure that veterans who were eligible are able to get the compensation fund. But, as you said, it was intended to be a remedy for the Rescission Act, right? So people, who were not able to have their service, recognized because they served under USAFE or the Philippine Scouts or recognized guerrilla units, that they were able to get the compensation fund. But you've got about 18,000 folks that ultimately received that benefit.
But now with this new Congressional Medal bill, or this act, which was passed, now we're including everyone else. And now how many thousands more are included?
Ultimately, when President Roosevelt signed, the executive action in 1941 in July 26th that created the U.S. Army Forces of the Far East, ultimately more than 200,000, soldiers were essentially conscripted into service. So, you've got all of those folks that are technically eligible or their next of kin, so you're looking at, a pretty large number, so even kind of a mild, even a very conservative estimate of, 20,000 medals that we're looking to purchase is $1 million price tag on it. Right. And so,
wait, you're not just including though the USFA people and the Philippine Scouts and all those who are in the Philippines. You're also including now the Filipino Americans who were here and fought in the U.S. Army. So how many more is included there?
Ultimately, probably, over 250,000 soldiers will, we're approximating will be eligible for this.
So, well, that's a lot of medals. And I know that when I first talked to you guys, you and General Taguba, and congratulations to him, I thought I'd talk to you because I always talk to General Taguba, and I thought, I got to talk to Ben. Because he probably did a lot.
Well, my parents appreciate it.
Well, so my question is, there was an effort to raise money to get these replicas. There's going to be the Congressional Gold Medal, but the replica is not going to be gold, but it is going to be a worthy replica. Did you raise the money? Is there more needed? Was the goal accomplished?
Yeah. So, our efforts are ongoing. I mean, not only are we still raising money for replicate medals for the veterans that are eligible, but we're also getting ready to roll out an education program over the next year or two, where we will provide online resources and a curriculum, working with the Smithsonian. The Nisei veterans have always been sort of the template for us. General Taguba was also part of that work with the National Veterans Network that worked to get the Congressional Gold Medal for Japanese American World War II veterans. But, that work to create the curriculum, to work with the Smithsonian, to put it online, to provide, local efforts to demonstrate the curriculum. I mean, that's all going to take money as well. In California, obviously, last year passed a law that, calls for inclusion of the Filipino World War II veterans in the curriculum, but there's no money to put that into effect, right? And so, the creation of the curriculum that we're going to be doing will benefit, places like California. There's efforts to do something similar in other states. So I think creating a curriculum and an education program will really cement the lasting legacy of these folks. So, we're looking to raise enough money, even just for 20,000 medals, that's $1 million. Yeah. And then it'll take another $1 million, to create the education program and to run the organization. All right. So you're benefiting it.
So you're still not done, and yet you're going to have the ceremony on October 25th. That's when the formal recognition will be. I wasn't quite sure. You said that there was going to be a place for the actual awarding of the medal to personnel at a later date. So you're not talking about the same day or the same week. You're talking about much later, right?
Well, so there's a couple of things, Emil. So the announcement that the speaker made today calls for the official national presentation of the Congressional Gold Medal on October 25th, in the day at 11 o'clock. Mm-hmm. That evening, we're going to be putting, that is going to be on Capitol Hill. It's going to be a very sort of contained, invitation only, event. We're working with them to make sure that they know, that the veterans that are in our registry that we're recommending, but it's the speaker's office that will invite, just the people that will fit into that room. Right. So our intent will be to create a community celebration after that presentation, right? So it'll be much larger. We're looking to bring 500 of our closest friends from around the country, to the DC area so that, that we can publicly celebrate, their achievements.
But there won't be any medals per se handed out to them, or will there?
There will be. So the initial run of medals that we've been able to purchase, we've been able to make an initial purchase of 1,000 medals based on the money we've raised so far. So those 1,000 medals will be allocated to the veterans that are currently on our registry. So, we can't give a medal to a veteran that we don't know. So the registry is our way of documenting who's eligible and who will be able to benefit from the money that we've raised for them. So, so those medals will be given out to veterans or their family members that are able to be in DC on October 25th. But also we're working with our regional board of directors to put on regional events. And those will be coming, in the coming months. Like Houston may have one, California's talking about having one, Seattle has been really active. So there are places like that we're looking to have additional regional presentations. We know that not every veteran is obviously going to be able to come to DC. They're all very old. So we've tried to put more of a premium on, making sure that our board is going to be able to work with communities, to make sure that there are regional presentations that will be happening. Those are kind of in the works right now, but that's the idea. right?
Yeah.
So our
look,
ongoing work is to make sure that those will be happening. But at the same time, if you look at the speaker's press release, it's going to be live streamed. Mm-hmm. And so our hope also is for people who can't make it, that they'll be able to go to their Filipino Community Center or their VA, or their VFW, mm-hmm. or their, to Lola's house, and watch it so that so that as many people in the community can be with us virtually as we go to Washington D.C. to see the culmination of this legislation.
All right, so tell me about the people who haven't registered yet, or who say, "Hey, I'm eligible. My father was in the Army in World War II. He wasn't in the Far East, and he wasn't a scout, but he was in the Army. We're eligible too." All right, so where do those people go to register? Because they would be eligible, right? They would be eligible for this.
Right. So, we are out. So our registry is the vehicle through which we are providing the medals that we're able to purchase, right? Mm-hmm. So if you, sign up on our registry, and, it's on philvetrep.org/registry.
Where is it again?
Fill out the form.
Say it again slowly.
Sorry. Yeah, it's Filvetrep, FILVET .rep.org, Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project /registry. Right. And you'll see the eligibility, you'll see some supportive documents, and you'll see the application form.
Ben, spell that out one more time again, clearly, just so that people can get it and, mm-hmm. and they don't miss it.
Yeah, it's our Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project website, philvetrep.org, FILVETREP.org/registry.
All right, so philvetrep, that's with a P,
mm-hmm.
.org, and that's where people go. All right,
yep.
And there's still time, even though the ceremony is going to be October 25th, there's still time to do it.
Yes. So, I think we're working with the speaker, that event is going to be very small, and so we're trying to, get as many registered veterans that are already on our registry, into that room as possible. But, people can and should register regardless. Maybe they'll be able to get to DC, but even if they're not, we want to make sure that they get their medal. And if they're watching, they're watching the live stream, or they'll take part in the regional events that will be happening. We want to make sure that no matter when they register, that when they do register, that we're able to do, to show them the recognition that their service deserves.
And this is could be up to 250,000 military personnel families.
It could be.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah. No, and our organization as a nonprofit has been, operating. We're largely volunteer run. We're running on duct tape, spit, and a prayer. But, I think that as we get the story out there, everyone is like, oh, well, I got to get one for my Lolo. And, okay, well, I should just buy, I should donate, another $50, another $100 so that, that someone else's Lola can get it too. So
how much does a medal cost? How much does a medal cost?
We're hoping... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How much does a medal cost?
So a medal costs approximately $50, mm-hmm. $52.36 or something like that.
Does it come? It come blessed by the priest or anything, or?
Well, it comes in a case, and it comes with, we're providing copies of the legislation mm-hmm. with it. So, so it's kind of a symbolic medal, but you also get to see the legislation, a copy of the bill that was signed on December 14th by President Obama.
And where does the actual medal, is it the actual medal that's presented to the veterans? Is it on this? Will it be on display at the Smithsonian or?
Mm-hmm. That is exactly right. So, so we've just had our initial meeting with the Smithsonian. We're working with the, military history, folks there. We're working with the Asian Pacific American Center there, which was, until recently headed by Conrad Ng, who was, President Obama's brother-in-law, and now has someone new at the helm. But we're working with, a couple of different agencies at the Smithsonian to coordinate, what the program will look like moving forward, like where the Congressional Gold Medal will be housed. Even, moving it around from place to place, requires more security than you might suspect, right? Like it's one of a kind, and it requires kind of a security detail as we move it from the Smithsonian to the Capitol building for the presentation. So, but the Smithsonian is kind of our key partner in this. And we've been meeting with the folks that are going to be moving this forward.
Well, Ben, this is great news. I know that you've been working with General Taguba on this as part of the executive committee of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. And I hope to talk to him about this, like as I said. But this was not a contentious thing, but it still was not easy. And it seems to be one of the things that, congressional green light would happen without question. So I don't know. I guess I go back to the idea that, actually, I don't think it took all that long. Because when we first started talking about this, it was maybe a year and a half ago, right? Something like that?
Yeah. I mean, these, Congressional Gold Medal legislation, I haven't been part of a whole lot of similar processes. I sort of vaguely followed the Japanese American veterans process and was involved in that at the tail end. But, these bills have to move pretty quickly. Otherwise, they kind of get stale and it becomes more difficult to move the longer you try to get it in, right? It's like, it's like the athlete who's trying to get who's on the bill to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame for like the 8th time or whatever, So I think that it's important to get it in and get your story in and make sure you're pushing the right folks. But we were never guaranteed that this would happen, but the community came through, our champions came through, and, we're going to get to celebrate that victory on the 25th.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked about equity pay being sort of not quite the whole pie that everyone wanted or hoped for, but does this make things a little better? Does it address the void a little bit, having this medal?
I think it allows us to talk about not only the victories and the progress that our veterans have achieved, but it also allows us to point to some of the ongoing challenges, right? So, the legislation that created the compensation fund wasn't perfect. And so a lot of veterans have sort of slipped through the cracks. And so, some of our champions like Senator Hirono again, like Congressman Gabbard, like some of those folks have stepped forward to try to, create legislation to try to fix some of those, some of those fixes, to get some of those fixes in place to make sure that more veterans who are truly eligible will be able to break through the red tape. The immigration work was important. Senator Akaka's Filipino Veterans Recognition, Family Reunification Act, rather, that he had first introduced a couple of years ago. President Obama ultimately was able to put a parole process in place for them. But, these veterans who are here, a lot of their family members never applied because they were like, well, why am I going to wait 20 years for this petition to go through, right? So, there's still so many challenges that our veterans are facing. But, I think this allows us, any movement requires a victory to keep going, right? And so as long as there's a veteran who still needs our help, we're going to keep fighting for him.
Now, I know this isn't the only issue you care about or are involved in. Right now we have this DACA issue that everyone is sort of, focused on in some ways. And yet this, and then on a day when there seems to be some kind of bipartisan movement with DACA, here is the Filipino Vets Medal story, which is a true bipartisan act. How hard is it going to be to get a bipartisanship with DACA, you think? After knowing how hard and easy, this thing with the vets and their medal has been,
Yeah.
Bipartisanship is the goal. It's the ideal, right? We want to get out of this swamp, but we have to drain Republicans and Democrats, it seems.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that gives me hope, I just came from an event, that Jose Antonio Vargas is putting on with, we're bringing together undocumented immigrants, Filipinos, Latinos, all other folks, but to also bring into the conversation Native American folks, right? So a dialogue between the first Americans and the new Americans, every time I think that, that bipartisanship is dead and there's nothing new under the sun and we're just, the political climate looks too bleak, like people will never cease to amaze me. The new connections that we continue to make between different people who find common cause with each other, people from across the aisle, from across the reservation borders, I think that finding new ways to connect to each other. I think if there's anything that will break this kind of partisanship that our country is in, it's, breaking out of your own experience and trying to make a connection with people who don't see the world in the same way that you do. So, there's a lot of political breach that has happened, but I think we need to build bridges, not walls, right?
Yeah. Well, it means we have to stay open, and it also means that we have to be a little less ideological in some respects, huh?
I think it's always a tough dance to negotiate, staying strong with your convictions and also trying to find a way to work with people. What some people, call compromise, some people call selling out, so there has to be a way for us to figure out how to find ways to work with people, even when they don't agree with us, in ways that still, feel good to our values. So it's never been an easy road to walk. And in some ways it's become even harder with the way that, political discourse has become so coarse, over the last year. But, I think I wouldn't still be doing this work if I felt that there wasn't any hope, Yeah.
Well, one of the things that is odd is that this man who is president, who many people have maligned in the first 8 months, has shown something in his ways and his contradictory tweets and the meeting with Pelosi and with Schumer on DACA that indicates that he's being less ideological than some of his critics, and it may, I think, open up a little avenue of people maybe coming toward Trump as opposed to constantly criticizing him for. I mean, it seems like he always seems to be contradicting himself on, he'll say something good on one thing and then bad on another thing. But it seems to be opening up a kind of situational politics that is uniquely Trump and is different from a lot of folks who, they see themselves as one thing and that's what they're fighting for. And so I don't know. Maybe we're seeing a transformation. Is that you're in Washington?
Well,
is that happening?
I think you named it correctly, Emil. Right? I think it is a situational politics. I mean, he has literally spoken out of both sides of his mouth on so many issues. I mean, DACA just being one of them, right? Yeah. On one hand, he's said build the wall, and then at the same time he's like, oh well, you can't. I have children, and these are so. I think that to me, what's going to be most important is, how people on both sides of the aisle sort of ride the wave of his capriciousness and uncertainty, to come to policy goals. Yeah. Strident partisanship has not gotten the Republicans, to meet their goals, and so maybe this is what he's trying to do now. So,
wishy-washy partisanship as opposed to strident partisanship.
I think it's unstable partisanship. It's unpredictable partisanship. I mean, I think, I think if there's one thing we've learned here, it's that we haven't learned anything at the risk of sounding, opaque. But I think that, I think we don't know. He's proven himself to be an unknown quantity, I think. So
still after 9 months. Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I think it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're working, through him, around him, whatever preposition, will get people to make the phone calls, to their members of Congress, whatever gets people, into the work. But, he has his supporters and he has people who don't support him. And so, I think we have to figure out how to navigate, those politics to get progress done on the issues we care about.
And of course, he would be for the Congressional Gold Medal for the Filipinos, right?
Well, I would hope so. But, again, if I've learned anything, it's that I will not predict anything that he would say or do.
Yeah. So, but he doesn't have a say-so on this. This is the Congressional Medal, right?
This is the Congressional Gold Medal. One of the things that we've always said is that President Obama, as a son of Hawaii, began his career with the Veterans Equity Compensation Fund. Is one of the first bills he passed. Mm-hmm. And on December 14th, one of his final bills that he passed that he signed into law was the Congressional Gold Medal for Filipino World War II veterans. Yeah. So, all of this is done in a new political environment, but it doesn't take away from the victory that we won for them.
Yeah. Well, listen, Ben, congratulations on getting this through. It is an example of bipartisanship that we cherish and that we want to see more of in Washington. And congratulations to the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project. And we look forward to talking to General Taguba and you more as we approach that October 25th date. And a reminder that people can still register at your website at Phil.
Yeah, they can register. They can donate, to help raise money for the veterans because these medals, don't pay for themselves. So philvetrep.org. Yep.
FILVETREP.org, right?
Exactly.
philvetrep.org. Ben, Thank you for your time and congratulations again.
On behalf of the veterans that we're all working for, thank you, Emil.
All right.
Ben DeGuzman of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project talking about that Congressional Gold Medal for Filipino veterans of World War II. And as he says, it's not too late. All you have to do is go to their website, and their website is at www.philvetrep.org. That's FILVETREP.org. And so that's an example of bipartisanship, so important that no one cares, and they just kind of, let it go unanimously. But it was not that easy, as you heard Ben DeGuzman say. And now we have to make it happen on the tough issues, too. And we'll see how this new kind of bamboo politics emerges, where many of us will have to bend a little left or right to get things done. And that means all of us, wherever we may be on the political spectrum. Even Donald Trump, who just wants to win, right? Can he bend that far? And that's our program for today. Hey, we're on iTunes. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends about the show. Share a link. You can contact me on Twitter at Emil Amok, or go to the ALDEF blog at www.aldef.org/blog. And give us your feedback on www.amok.com. That's AMOK.com. Leave a message on SpeakPipe there. You don't need a phone. And if you're so moved, check out the blog and support the program. Go to aaldef.org/blog and click on the donate button. ALDEF is a 501c3 and your help is fully tax deductible. Yeah, just go to the blog at aldef.org/blog. nbsp.org/blog and let them know you like the podcast and the blog. And that's it. It's been a tough week. I attended a funeral. My auntie Lori Guillermo, passed away, and she was a strong leader in the community, the United Laogaños of San Francisco. She came to America in 1953 and really represented the wave of women who came after the war to come and start Filipino families. And, she was a pioneer in the Filipino American community, not just in San Francisco, but in America, because she represented that group of women who came after the war and the Filipino baby boom that ensued. So I remember my auntie Lori Guillermo, who passed away. Actually, last week. Her funeral was this week. And God bless her. May she rest in peace. Once again, thanks for listening to Emil Amok's Takeout. I'm Emil Guillermo.